Welcome to Silent Stories Updates. Sit back, relax, and let me take you into a story that proves that no one can steal what truly belongs to you. This is the story of how man's land was taken from him and how he took it back, one demolition at a time. It all began with a phone call that changed everything. "Ethan, you need to come down here right now." The voice on the other end was my lawyer's. Tense and urgent. "There's construction happening on your land." At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. My land, the property my father left me, wasn't just empty ground. It was a piece of family history, surrounded by old oak trees and bordered by a quiet lake. My father had worked that land for years, and after he passed, I promised myself I'd protect it. But when I pulled up to the property that morning, my stomach dropped. Bulldozers, cranes, and dozens of workers were everywhere. Concrete was being poured. Wooden frames for condos reached into the sky. And right at the entrance stood a big, polished sign that read, "Future site of Willow Creek Condominiums by Lakeside HOA." I slammed my truck door and stormed toward the nearest worker. "Hey, what are you doing here? This is private property." He looked at me like I was insane. "Sir, this is an HOA-authorized construction site. We've got all the paperwork." He handed me a clipboard full of documents. At the top was a deed transfer and a permit stamped by the county office. Except one problem, I never sold this land. I felt my chest tighten. "Where did you get this?" I demanded. "From the Willow Creek HOA," he said. "You can talk to them if you've got issues." I could barely form words. I just stood there, watching them destroy the land my father built his life on. Trees were being ripped out. Dirt was piled high. The lake that once reflected the sky was murky from runoff. Later that day, I sat in my lawyer's office while he combed through the paperwork. His face turned pale. "Ethan, they filed forged ownership documents. They transferred the land illegally. The county approved it because the signatures look legitimate. They forged my name?" I whispered. He nodded grimly. "And they're building fast. It looks like they're trying to finish before you notice." That night, I drove back out to the property and parked by the gate. The air smelled like diesel and wet soil. I remembered when my dad used to take me fishing by that same lake, when he'd say, "Son, land isn't just a thing you own. It's part of who you are." Now, it felt like that part of me was being stolen. The next morning, I requested a meeting with the HOA president. Her name was Carol Monroe, a sharp, confident woman with perfectly styled hair and the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. When I walked into her office, she didn't even stand up. She just crossed her arms and said, Mr. Carter, I figured you'd show up eventually." "You're building on my land," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know that's illegal." She gave a short laugh. "Your land? I think you'll find the paperwork says otherwise. Maybe you should have paid more attention to local zoning changes. This area's been rezoned for residential development. Rezoned doesn't mean stolen." I snapped. Carol leaned back in her chair. "You can sue us if you want, but by the time the courts get around to it, those condos will be full of families. You wouldn't want to be the man who tears down people's homes, would you?" I left her office that day with shaking hands and fire in my chest. Over the next few days, I gathered everything I could: my father's original deed, old tax records, boundary maps, family photos, everything. My lawyer and I spent hours piecing together proof that the land was still legally mine. Meanwhile, construction continued like nothing had happened. Every morning, I drove past the site and saw more of my land disappear beneath steel and concrete. It felt like watching someone erase my family's legacy, one bulldozer at a time. My wife, Sarah, tried to keep me calm. "Ethan, we'll fix this," she said one night, resting her hand on mine. "Don't let them break you." But it was hard to sleep when I could still hear the machines grinding in my mind. Finally, after a week of fighting paperwork, something changed. My lawyer called early in the morning, his tone urgent but triumphant. "Ethan, the county just finished reviewing the case. The deed transfer was fraudulent. Your ownership has been fully restored." I sat in silence for a moment, gripping the phone. "So, it's mine again?" "It's yours," he confirmed, "and you have the legal right to remove anything built without your permission." I walked out onto my porch, the sunrise spilling across the horizon, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I showed up at the property again, but this time I wasn't alone. 3 large demolition trucks rolled behind me, engines rumbling. The crew was ready, standing by with helmets and safety gear. The same construction foreman from before ran toward me, panic on his face. "Sir, you can't do this. We're under contract." "No," I said firmly, handing him the county notice. "You're trespassing. This is my land." He stepped back, speechless. Minutes later, a black SUV screeched to a stop. Carol Monroe climbed out, heels clicking against the gravel. "Ethan, stop this madness," she shouted. "You can't tear down our project." I held out the official paperwork. "You forged my name, you stole my land, and you built on it without permission. You have no right to be here." She glared at the document, her face draining of color. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I gave the demolition crew a nod. Engines roared to life, and the sound of metal tearing filled the air. The first condo wall came crashing down in a burst of dust and splintered wood. One by one, the unfinished units crumbled, their frames collapsing like dominoes. Neighbors gathered along the road, filming on their phones, whispering in disbelief. Some clapped. Others watched in stunned silence. But I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. When the last building fell, the property was silent again, except for the wind brushing through what little grass was left. Carol stood frozen, staring at the wreckage. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers," she muttered before storming off. "I already have mine," I said softly. The next few weeks were chaos. The HOA tried to sue me for damages, but the evidence of their fraud destroyed their case. The forged documents were traced back to Carol herself, along with to board members who admitted to being part of the scheme. Within 2 months, the Willow Creek HOA was dissolved. Carol was arrested for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The news spread quickly. Local stations picked it up, calling it one of the biggest land fraud scandals in the county's history. And me, I finally got to walk my land again. The ground was torn up, the trees gone, and the lake still murky, but it was mine. I could breathe again. I spent days cleaning the debris, clearing the soil, and watching the sun rise over what used to be chaos. Sarah helped me plant new trees, the same kind of oaks my father loved. Every day we planted another row, watching green life slowly take root again. One evening, as the sky turned gold, Sarah stood beside me and said, "You really did it. You took it all back." I smiled, looking at the rows of young saplings. "It was never about revenge," I said. "It was about respect. My father's memory, our family's history. No one has the right to take that away." Sometimes, when I walk by the lake at sunset, I still hear my father's voice in my mind. "Good job, son," he says, just like he used to when I helped him fix fences or plant new seeds. I don't plan to sell the land. I don't plan to build anything fancy either. Just a small cabin where Sarah and I can spend weekends, surrounded by the sound of wind through the trees. Peace, I've learned, doesn't come from what you own. It comes from fighting for what matters and knowing you stood your ground when everyone else told you to back down. A few months later, the county held a public meeting about land zoning and HOA oversight. They invited me to speak, to share my story. I stood in front of the crowd, hands trembling slightly, and said, "I'm not here to talk about laws or loopholes. I'm here to remind you that justice doesn't belong to the loudest or richest people. It belongs to those who refuse to give up." The room was quiet. Some people nodded. Others clapped. And for the first time, I realized my fight had meant something beyond my own property. It gave others the courage to stand up too. The land has healed since then. The trees are growing. The air feels lighter. And every time I see those green leaves swaying in the breeze, I remember the moment I took back my father's legacy, not through anger, but through strength. I learned that day that you can't buy peace. You earn it by standing tall when the world tries to knock you down. And as for the people who tried to take what wasn't theirs, they'll always be remembered not for what they built, but for how quickly it all came crashing down. This is Ethan Carter's story, a story about loss, courage, and the power of standing your ground. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come from the courtroom. It comes from the sound of a demolition crew taking back what was stolen. Thank you for watching Silent Stories Updates. If this story moved you, remember to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, the quietest people carry the loudest strength.